Hello and welcome to this episode of Your Family Wealth, the show that deals with all things related to wealth planning, wealth protection and wealth transfer. I'm your host, Remy Ayala, and today I'll be covering a very important topic, so don't go away. I will also have as my guest Teresa Lloyd, a philanthropy advisor, who will be talking about philanthropy and giving. But before we get started, here's what we've got lined up for you.
Coming up, the Family Wealth Quiz. Answer at the end of the show. Topic of the week, case history, guest expert, tip of the week.
First, it's time for the Family Wealth Quiz.
What is the meaning of estate planning? A. Arranging the purchase of a new house. B. Preparing for the transfer of a person's wealth and assets after his or her death. C. Creating a new property development.
This week, I'll be talking about lasting powers of attorney and how to set them up. It's well known that the UK population is aging, with more of us living longer than ever before. With 3.2 million people aged 80 or over, more and more people are going to be relying on family and friends for help with their finances and their care. But how do you give somebody the legal authority to make decisions for you in relation to either your finances or healthcare decisions? Well, you'll have to create a lasting power of attorney. A lasting power of attorney is a document you use to give someone the legal authority to make decisions for you. The good thing about them, unlike ordinary powers of attorney, is that they can be used even after you lose mental capacity. There are two kinds of lasting powers of attorney. There's the property and finance lasting power of attorney, and that's used to make decisions over your financial affairs. There's also the lasting power of attorney for health and welfare, and as the name suggests, that's used to make decisions regarding your health care. How do you set up a lasting power of attorney? Well, you can do it yourself or you can get professional help. If you get professional help, then you'll be guided over the intricacies and the kinds of restrictions you can put on your attorneys. Otherwise, you can do it yourself by going to the website of the Office of the Public Guardian, and there are forms on there that you can fill, download, and then send to the Office of the Public Guardian for registration. To set up an LPA, you have to fill in a form, and there's a different form for each type of lasting power of attorney. The information you need to give on the LPA form includes the donor's details. That means your full name, your address, and your date of birth. The form requires details of your attorneys. Those are the people that will make decisions on your behalf when the power of attorney comes into effect. You need their details, full name, date of birth, address. And you can have one attorney or more than one. It's entirely up to you. You can have replacement attorneys, and these are people that will step in if the attorneys that you choose are unable to act for any reason. Now, you don't need to have replacement attorneys, but it's most advisable if you have only one attorney. You can choose for certain people to be notified when the lasting power of attorney is being registered. This is a protection mechanism for the elderly and for the vulnerable. You don't need to have people to be notified, but if you're in a vulnerable position, then it's advisable. If you have more than one attorney, you have to decide whether they make their decisions jointly or whether they can make it individually. If you choose that they should make their decisions jointly, then it means that if one is away, the other person can't act for you. So think very carefully before you choose joint decision making, because it's very restrictive on your attorneys. You can include preferences in your lasting power of attorney, and that's guidance for the attorneys to help them make decisions for you. You can also include instructions that the attorneys are legally obliged to follow. You need a certificate provider. That's someone who can certify that you know what you're doing and that no one has forced you to make the lasting power of attorney. The certificate provider can either be someone you've known for a long time, not your family members, or it can be a professional, and that professional will interview you before certifying that you know what you're doing. For health and welfare lasting powers of attorney, you need to say whether your attorneys are going to have the authority to give or refuse consent on your behalf if you should be in a persistent vegetative state. You can choose either to give them that authority, or you can choose that they should not have the authority. If they have the authority, then they can make that decision for you if that time should ever come. Once you've completed the form, then you've got to get it signed. All the parties, you, the donor, the attorneys, replacement attorneys, certificate providers, the person registering the lasting power of attorney, you all have to sign it. But there's a strict order in which you have to sign, and this is where a lot of people get it wrong. If you're not sure, get some guidance or get a professional to assist you. After that, you send the form in to the Office of a Public Guardian for registration. The registration fee is £82, and that's for each lasting power of attorney. There's no discount for more than one. However, there's a reduction in fees to either half or nothing at all if you qualify. The property and finance lasting power of attorney can be used before you lose mental capacity, but only if you say so on the LPA form. The health and welfare lasting power of attorney can only be used after you lose mental capacity. But remember, both types of lasting power of attorney cannot be used until they are registered, so it's best to register it as soon as you complete the form. I've put together the guidance from the Office of a Public Guardian on LPAs into a booklet, which you can download from familywealthuk.com. That's it for this week's topic. Next time, I'll talk about business lasting powers of attorney. You have to watch if you own a business or a share in a business. It's time for case history. This week's case history involves a challenge to the wills of Jean Clitheroe in a battle between her son John and her daughter Sue. The main issue in the case was whether any of Jean's two wills, one made in 2010 and the other in 2013, was valid. Both wills, which John claimed were valid, left the bulk of the estate to him. At stake was an estate valued at around £350,000. As so often happens, this was a case of more than just wills. Family relationships and sibling rivalry were all at play, in this case involving allegations of sexual abuse, a failed marriage, a deceased daughter, a grieving mother, accusations of theft and shopaholic spending, all of which played a part in this rather sad case. So how would the judge decide, and what can we learn from this case? The rest of the case is available now on familywealthuk.com. Charities that depend on big fundraising events like marathons and gala dinners are suffering enormously during the COVID-19 lockdown. At the same time, we have seen some tremendous fundraising efforts led by Sir Tom Moore, of course, and they've raised so much money, which indicates that people really do want to give. But how do you go about it? Joining me today to discuss the ins and outs of philanthropy and giving is Teresa Lloyd, a leading advisor to families on strategic philanthropy and also to charities seeking to develop long-term relationships with donors. She's also the author of several books, the most recent of which is Richer Lives. Welcome, Teresa. Thank you for joining me today. So, Teresa, as we have seen recently, giving is on a lot of people's minds, but there's so many charities, and how do we choose?
Well, I think the key questions to ask is, do I and my family care passionately about this? And do I think that this issue, and do I think that this particular organization is very well placed, is effectively managed at addressing the issue? So it's, do I care about it, and are they good at it? And if I don't know this organization at all yet, am I being introduced to it by somebody I know, somebody I respect, who is themselves a supporter? I think in a nutshell.
One sore point for many is how much charities spend on administration. Does that really matter?
Oh, I understand the concern, but I think it's the wrong question to ask. I think the most important thing is how effective the charity is at reaching and helping the beneficiaries it exists to support, both in the immediate term and in the longer term. So that means they have to spend money on things like monitoring their activities, learning what works and what doesn't, being accountable to and reporting to the funders on the impact, good financial management, recruiting and training the right staff, proper governance, trustees and so on, and investing in fundraising, which costs money, we might come back to that now and in the future. And of course, some causes are much more popular than others, and the hard to promote causes find it harder to raise money.
Many have criticised the website justgiving.com for levying a fee of £308,000 on the Sir Tom Moore fundraise of 33 million. Actually, I think a bit more than that now. What are your views?
I'm not an expert in this area, but I think what I feel is that 300 and odd thousand is less than 1% of the total. In fact, I think it's now more than 33 million. And I suspect that Just Giving would say all our users are charities, every single one of them. And it's not for us, perhaps, to choose between causes. And they can't operate without charging. That's what they do. And they have to provide an effective platform, the website. They have to make it easier for donors to give, to make sure the payments are secure, to manage gift aid, to presumably deal with the HMRC. So it's a huge amount of money for the sum, but I think given the service they provide, less than 1% is pretty good.
What role does family dynamics play in giving?
Well, it's important. It's as important here as in any other decision making. I think it's very important to involve partners, husband, wife, whatever. It's because usually, certainly significant giving is a family decision, not just one person. And it's also important to involve children, certainly teenagers. And indeed, I would say, and I know from my own research and working with families, that getting together to agree on giving, encouraging children to be involved, and indeed sometimes allocating almost a little box or pot to children to then be able to make a case for the charity that they care about, can be hugely important in inculcating family values, bringing a family together, and indeed in developing an appreciation of the challenges faced by so many other constituencies in society, and therefore the value of money. And indeed in an increasingly secular society, family giving, family philanthropy can help to develop the principles and ethics which in previous years were based on religious observation. And I think for the wealthier, family philanthropy is very bound up with estate planning. I mean, it's part of the whole, it's not just a one-off decision. And for those without children, which, as we know, is an increasing proportion of the population, making charitable bequests to the organizations that they support and that have provided fulfillment and made a real difference to people about whom they care can be a real and lasting legacy that is actually about far more than money.
So what's your advice for charities seeking donations?
I think too many charities make mistakes when approaching the wealthy, especially after the publication of the rich list, which, as we know, has just happened this year. They don't spend money on research, and they actually sometimes waste time and money on a completely scattergun approach, just approaching people because they're rich. So they may think this person's got the capacity to give, but they don't necessarily know whether they're interested in the cause, may already be committed to other organizations in the same field. And quite separately, we know that right now, many people will be feeling much less secure than they were before for all sorts of reasons. And many wealthier families already have a charitable trust. And if they do, they often have very clear guidelines on a website, which says, this is what we support, this is what we don't support, here's how to apply, and what information we need to have. But there's a lot of research from the Association of Charitable Foundations, which is a sort of umbrella body, which shows actually that too many applications fall at the first hurdle, because some charities, by no means all, but some, I'm afraid probably particularly smaller ones that have fewer resources, and they fail because charities ignore all that and say, oh, well, we're terrific and we'll apply anyway. And also, we talked earlier on that the donors should ask themselves, how effective is this organisation? Charities don't provide evidence that they are effective. They don't monitor what they do. To them, it's self-evident that what they do is good. But increasingly nowadays, donors, whether they're individuals or bigger grant makers, look for some evidence that is indeed the case, because, as you said right at the beginning, there's so much choice. And occasionally charities apply for sums of money that they're clearly not equipped to handle. So a huge amount, which may represent a year's expenditure in one go. So I would say the advice to donors going back is to research the organizations you want to support, and to organize charities seeking funding, to research the donors, and if possible, to engage your trustees and existing networks to make introductions.
Thank you. And moving from that straight onto the Sunday Times Rich List, which you mentioned. The Sunday Times Rich List for this year devotes a section to giving. What are the main trends we see?
Well, it's very interesting. Higher education was mentioned a lot. And as we know, there's a long tradition of giving, to centuries of people giving to higher education, particularly by people who've benefited from it. And they see this as the underpinning of their success and their career, and they want to give back. What we see on the Rich List is that there continues to be a major focus on funding education, and now particularly on focusing on higher education for the socially disadvantaged. It's a trend, it's been happening already. In our own research for Richer Lives, which you mentioned, we found that other than people setting up their own charitable trusts, higher education and the arts were the causes that received the most donations by value, and that some 40% of donors supported higher education to varying levels. So what we see now clearly is an increasing emphasis on focus on addressing the social mix, on widening participation, and on donations with strings attached, addressing that issue, the scholarships for a particular group of people. And another approach is that described in the Rich List by Peter Lampel, who in 1997 set up the Sutton Trust, which precisely addresses, which is now, it says, helped more than 40,000 young people to get to top universities.
Amazing.
And similarly, if I could just say, in the arts, I know from my own work that increasingly, it's an echo of this, that donors are increasingly interested in funding access by disadvantaged groups, tickets for the theatre, classes for education and outreach work, an increasing number of arts organisations doing this. Often it's work that doesn't hit the headlines, but more and more donors want to fund that rather than the more prominent activities. Just one interesting relevant thing for now, our research showed, this is several years ago now, that increasingly for newer, younger, wealthy people, health causes receive more than traditional health-related causes than traditional donors. And I assume that now this is a trend which will continue even more strongly.
What's the best way to go about supporting a local cause?
Well, I think for local charities, probably the best source of information would be community foundations, the local community foundations. There are over 45 around the country, different geographical areas. Their umbrella organisations is UK Community Foundations, and I believe you, Remy, are going to give details of their websites and of the other organisations that I mentioned at the end of the programme. So the thing about community foundations is that they have a number of local members already who support local causes. They undertake research into them. They provide advice on the practicalities of giving. They can undertake some of the admin for you if you want dealing with gift aid and that sort of thing. And very importantly, I think they can put you in touch with other donors who are interested in the same cause. And the reason I say that that's important is because collaborating with other donors can be hugely rewarding, because you're involved with like-minded people who care about the same things, and collective giving can make a bigger difference, obviously.
That's good. Yes.
And if you want to support your local NHS trust or health generally, like Sir Tom to be more, you can either approach them directly, obviously the local hospital and so on, or you can give through NHS Charities Together, which is the sort of umbrella trust, which is actually the one that Sir Tom supported. And the National Emergencies Trust has launched a coronavirus appeal with the purpose of supporting grassroots organisations that are working with very vulnerable people all around the country. And interestingly, much of their support will be channeled through community foundations, and all those people have websites. And if you have an interest in a particular area, a particular cause, particular type of work, there'll almost certainly be some kind of umbrella organisation. For example, I'm passionately interested in music, and the Help Musicians UK has launched a hardship fund for musicians, because all the freelance musicians in all genres lost their work more or less overnight, and they've already had over 17,000 applications to this fund, so it shows how important it is.
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, we're going to show the details and links to all the charities and all the organizations you mentioned and resources. So we'll show them at the end of the program, and thanks very much for that. What are the practicalities that people need to think about in relation to philanthropy?
Well, this is a huge and complicated subject, and I mentioned legacies, so just to say it's very important to take advice when making a will, and there is a tax incentive. If you give more than 10% to charities, then your inheritance tax is reduced. There are many other practical considerations to do with gift aid. Most people will know about this, but essentially, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, a donation of £125, just to make the numbers easier, can be a net cost to you of £75. You can set up a charity account with the Charities Aid Foundations, and there are a number of organisations that advise on philanthropy and giving, including Philanthropy Impact and New Philanthropy Capital, whose websites will be at the end. The Charities Aid Foundations that I mentioned, they will certainly be able to cover this in more detail than I'm able to do at this point. And I believe you're going to have them invite somebody from there at a later session, which they will certainly be able to develop the advice on the practicalities.
And Teresa, a final word from you.
Well, I would say go for it. It's now more than ever, every pound will make a difference. Giving underpins the charities that actually, as we have seen, hold our communities together. They sustain the local community, and it's hugely rewarding for donors, which is why the strapline for my own activities, my own business, is richer lives for donors, richer lives for beneficiaries. And as others in my field have observed, you very seldom meet an ex-philanthropist.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Teresa, for joining us today. I'm sure we've all learned so much and are all much more clued up about philanthropy and giving. Thank you. Do make sure to go to our website, familywealthuk.com, for all the resources that Teresa mentioned.
Coming up now is my tip of the week. Use your annual exemption. Everyone is entitled to give away £3,000 every year free of inheritance tax, and between a couple it's £6,000. Now if you don't use it for 1 year, you can carry it over to the next year. That means that between a couple they can squirrel away a total of up to £36,000 over 5 years for their children or grandchildren, and possibly to help them get up the property ladder. Very useful, but if you don't use it, you lose it. Now for the answer to this week's quiz.
What is the meaning of estate planning? The answer is B. Preparing for the transfer of a person's wealth and assets after his or her death.
I'm afraid that's it for this week. Next time, the topic of the week will be business lasting powers of attorney, and we'll continue the subject of philanthropy, and my guest this time will be from the Charities Aid Foundation. Be sure to join us again next time for your weekly dose of family wealth wisdom. I'm Remy Ayala. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications of when we upload the next episode. Thank you for watching.